My parents stole my inheritance to fund my sister's lifestyle, claiming she needed it more because she was fragile. Years later, homeless and desperate, they begged at my door. I didn't let them in. Instead, I made one phone call that revealed their darkest secret. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The betrayal didn't happen in a scream. It happened in a whisper, in the sterile silence of a hospital room where I should have been safe. I was 24 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a drip in my arm, recovering from an emergency appendectomy that had complications. I was weak, physically drained, and worried about the mounting medical bills, but I had a safety net. Or at least, I thought I did. My grandmother, the only person who had ever really seen me for who I was, had left me $50,000 in her will. It was meant to be the down payment on a small starter home, the foundation of the independence I had been craving since I was 16. I had specifically asked my parents, Mabel and Oscar, to transfer the funds that week so I could pay the hospital deposit and secure the apartment I had been looking at. When they walked into the room, I tried to sit up, wincing at the sharp pull of the stitches in my side. I remember smiling at them, relieved to see familiar faces. I expected comfort. I expected reassurance. "Did you bring the paperwork?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The billing department is going to start harassing me by noon." Mabel, my mother, wouldn't look at me. She was fussing with the strap of her purse, her fingers twitching nervously. Oscar, my father, stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot with his arms crossed over his chest, his posture rigid. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocatingly thick. "Mom," I pressed, a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with the surgery. "The transfer." Mabel finally looked up, but her eyes were glassy, defensive. "Hannah, honey, we need to talk about that." "Talk about what? It's my money. Nana left it to me, specifically to me." "We had a family emergency," Oscar said from the window, not turning around. His voice was flat, devoid of the apology I deserved. "What emergency?" I asked, panic rising. "Is everyone okay?" "It's Susan," Mabel said, breathing out the name like a prayer. Susan, my older sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong despite doing everything wrong. She got into some trouble, Hannah, bad trouble. There were debts, dangerous people." I froze, and we had to pay them off, Mabel said, her voice strengthening with that twisted self-righteousness she always used when defending Susan. "She was going to lose her car, Hannah. She was going to be evicted. We couldn't let that happen. She's your sister." "You used my inheritance," I whispered, the room spinning. "You used my $50,000 to pay off Susan's credit cards." "It wasn't just credit cards," Mabel snapped, suddenly angry that I wasn't immediately understanding. "It was complicated. She needed a fresh start. We paid off her loans, her car note, and put a down payment on a condo for her so she'd have stability. She needs stability, Hannah. You know how fragile she is." "A condo?" I choked out. "You bought her a condo with my money, while I'm lying here wondering how to pay for this surgery." "You're strong, Hannah," Oscar said, finally turning to face me. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "You've always been the capable one. You have your degree, you have a job, you can get a loan. Susan, she can't handle that kind of pressure. She needed it more." "She needed it more," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's gone, Hannah," Mabel said, waving her hand as if dismissing a fly. "The money is gone. We did what we had to do as parents. You'll understand when you have children. You don't leave one behind." "You didn't leave one behind," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so potent it numbed the physical pain in my body. "You sacrificed one to feed the other." I looked at them, really looked at them, and realized that they didn't feel guilty. They felt justified. They expected me to nod, to absorb the blow, to be the good daughter who cleaned up the mess by simply existing without needs. "Get out," I said. "Hannah, don't be dramatic," Mabel started. Get out, I screamed, tearing the IV line slightly as I pointed to the door. Get out and don't come back until you have my money. They left, Oscar shaking his head in disappointment, Mabel muttering about how selfish I was being. As the door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the dim light of the hospital room, I realized the theft wasn't just financial. They had stolen my trust, my safety, and my PL. Ace in the family. But as I lay there, crying until my stitches burned, I made a vow. They thought I was strong enough to survive this. Fine, I would be. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was the surgical removal of my love for them. The weeks following my discharge from the hospital were a blur of humiliation and grit. Because Mabel and Oscar had drained my inheritance, I couldn't afford the deposit on the apartment I had lined up. I lost it. I couldn't afford the full rent of a new place in the city where my junior architect job was located, not with the medical bills piling up on my kitchen table like snowdrifts. I ended up sleeping on a friend's couch for 3 months. Every morning, I woke up with a stiff back, folded the borrowed blanket, and went to work, designing homes for other families while I didn't have one of my own. My parents didn't call to ask if I had a place to sleep. They didn't call to ask if my incision had healed. They called once, 2 weeks after the hospital incident, to tell me that Susan loved the new condo. "It has a balcony, Hannah," Mabel had chirped into the phone, as if our last conversation hadn't ended in screams. "She's going to plant herbs. It's going to be so good for her mental health. You should come see it. Bring a housewarming gift. Maybe a nice rug." I remember standing in the break room at work, gripping my phone so hard the plastic case creaked. "You want me to bring a gift to the house bought with my stolen money?" "Oh, stop it," Mabel sighed, her tone shifting to that familiar, exasperated disappointment. "It's family money, Hannah. It belongs to whoever needs it. Stop holding grudges. It's ugly. It makes you look bitter." "I am bitter," I said calmly. "I'm homeless, Mom. I'm sleeping on Sarah's couch." "Well, that's your choice," she retorted. "You make good money, you just need to budget better. Susan can't budget, her mind doesn't work that way. You're lucky you were born with a brain for numbers." I hung up. That was the moment I realized that arguing with them was like trying to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. They weren't capable of understanding, because their reality was entirely constructed around the sun that was Susan. I went low contact after that. I didn't block them, but I stopped answering. I stopped visiting. I focused entirely on my career. I worked 80-hour weeks. I took on the projects nobody else wanted, the difficult retrofits, the complex zoning nightmare sites. I became known in my firm as the woman who could solve anything, the woman who never slept. 5 years passed, then 7, then 10. I rose through the ranks. I became a senior architect. I bought my own home, a beautiful, dilapidated Victorian that I restored with my own hands, room by room, board by board. Every nail I hammered felt like an act of defiance. I built a life that was fortress thick and entirely mine. My parents and Susan remained on the periphery of my life, like static on a radio. Through the grapevine of distant aunts and cousins, I heard snippets of their lives. Susan had quit her job to become an influencer, which mostly meant posting pictures of expensive dinners Mabel and Oscar paid for. Then she tried to start a jewelry business, which failed. Then she moved a boyfriend into the condo, who caused damage that Oscar had to fix. They were bleeding money. I knew they were. Oscar had retired early, taking a lump sum pension, and Mabel had never worked. They were living on a fixed income while trying to sustain a champagne lifestyle for a daughter who refused to drink tap water. One rainy Tuesday, about a month before the final showdown, I received a voicemail from Oscar. "Hannah, it's Dad. Look, we need to verify some old paperwork regarding the family trust. Just call us back, it's urgent." I didn't call back, but I did do something else. I pulled out a box of documents I had kept from my grandmother's estate. I was an architect, but I had learned enough property law to be dangerous. I knew something they didn't. When they stole the $50,000, They had accessed a joint account my grandmother had set up. But they had forgotten one crucial thing about the deed to their own house. A legal stipulation my grandmother had insisted on 40 years ago when she helped them with their down payment. I ran my finger over the yellowing paper of the original deed copy I held. It was a life estate clause, but with a reversionary interest tied to specific conditions of solvency. They thought they owned their home outright. They thought they could leverage it to bail Susan out one more time. They had no idea that the moment they compromised their financial standing beyond a certain point, the ground beneath their feet shifted. I looked at the rain lashing against my restored Victorian window and took a sip of tea. "You should have read the fine print, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. They thought I was Juice. T, the silent, bitter daughter. They didn't realize I was the architect of their upcoming reality check. To understand why I let them stand in the rain, you have to understand Susan. And more importantly, you have to understand the monster my parents created in her. Susan was 3 years older than me, 31 at the time of the condo incident and now nearing 40. Since we were children, Susan was delicate. If she didn't want to do her homework, she had a migraine. If she didn't want to clean her room, she had anxiety. If she broke a neighbor's window, it was because she was overwhelmed. Mabel and Oscar fed this beast every single day. They didn't just enable her, they worshipped her helplessness. They viewed her incompetence as a sign of high status, as if being unable to function in the real world made her royalty. Conversely, my competence was viewed as a servitude. Because I could do things, I was obligated to do them for her. I remember when I was 16, working a summer job at a dairy freeze to save for a car. Susan, then 19, had crashed her car while texting. Mabel came into my room that night. "Hannah, honey, we need to take your savings." "What now?" "Susan needs a car to get to classes," Mabel had said, her eyes pleading but her grip on my piggy bank firm. "She can't take the bus. It gives her panic attacks. You can take the bus. You're tough." They took the money. Susan got a replacement car. I took the bus. 2 months later, Susan dropped out of those classes because the professor didn't like her vibe. This pattern repeated for decades. Now, 10 years after the inheritance theft, the dynamic had curdled into something toxic and desperate. I had hired a private investigator a few weeks prior, not to stalk them, but to protect myself. I needed to know their financial status because I had a feeling they would come for me eventually. The Pies report was sitting on my desk, and it was a dossier of disaster. Subject, Susan redacted, employment, unemployed for 4 years. Debt, estimated $80,000 in credit card debt. Asset status, the condo bought with my inheritance was foreclosed on 6 months ago. Subject, Mabel and Oscar redacted, status, primary residence heavily remortgaged. Reverse mortgage initiated 2 years ago. Funds fully depleted. I read the report with a mixture of horror and vindication. They had burned through everything. My $50,000 was gone. The condo was gone. And now they were eating into the equity of their own home to feed Susan's insatiable need for lifestyle. Then I saw the name of the advisor helping them, a man named Marcus Vane. I looked him up. He wasn't a financial advisor. He was a wealth manifestation coach that Susan had met online. He was the primary antagonist in this final act of their tragedy, though he never stepped foot in my house. He was the one whispering in Susan's ear that she deserved abundance, that her parents owed her their retirement, and that family assets were communal. I found a Facebook post from Susan, dated 2 days prior. It was a photo of her, Mabel, and Oscar at a fancy steakhouse. The caption read, "Manifesting new beginnings. The universe is moving us to bigger and better things. Family first, new chapter grateful." In the photo, Susan looked radiant, wearing a designer dress. Mabel looked tired, her smile strained. Oscar looked gray, his eyes hollowed out by stress. They were celebrating, but celebrating what? I zoomed in on the document sitting on the table next to Oscar's wine glass. It was blurry, but I recognized the letterhead. It was a foreclosure notice. They weren't celebrating a new beginning. They were celebrating a delusion. They were in total denial, likely egged on by this Marcus character telling them that if they just believed, the money would appear. Or they had a plan B. And as I sat there in my sturdy, paid-off home, watching the storm clouds gather over the city skyline, I realized with a sick thud in my heart that I was plan B. They had lost the condo. They were losing their house. And they hadn't called me to apologize. They hadn't called to reconcile. They were coming because they had consumed every other resource available to them, and I was the last crop left in the field. But they had forgotten that I wasn't a crop anymore. I was the farmer, and I had prepared for a drought. The storm that hit the city that Tuesday wasn't just a weather event. It was atmospheric foreshadowing. As the sky turned a bruised purple and the wind began to whip the oak trees in my front yard, I sat in my home office, staring at the document my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had just emailed me. I had spent the last week turning from a passive observer into an active strategist. After reading the PI report, I knew that waiting for them to show up on my doorstep was a fool's game. I needed leverage. I needed a wall that was stronger than brick and mortar. I had called Mr. Henderson, N, an old friend of my grandmother, S, who specialized in estate law, 3 days prior. Hannah, he had said, his voice gravelly over the phone. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. Your grandmother, bless her sharp soul, knew this day would come. The deed, I said, looking at the scan of the original property transfer for my parents' house. Tell me I'm reading this right, Arthur. You are, he confirmed. When your grandmother helped Mabel and Oscar buy that house in the 80s, she didn't trust Oscar with money. She loved him, but she knew he was soft. And she saw early on how they coddled Susan. So, she structured the down payment as a conditional gift tied to a life estate with reversionary interest. I leaned back in my chair, the legal jargon acting like a shield around my heart. Explain it like I'm 5, Arthur. It means, he said slowly, that your parents own the right to live in the house until they die, provided they maintain the property, pay the taxes, and this is the kicker, Hannah, do not encumber the property with debt exceeding 60% of its market value. If they violate these terms, the life estate terminates, and the title doesn't go to the bank. It reverts to the remainderman. That's you. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So, when they took out that second mortgage, and then the reverse mortgage, they triggered the clause, Arthur said. Technically, the bank has a lien, but your claim supersedes their ownership rights. The bank is currently moving to foreclose, but because you are the title holder on the reversion, I was able to step in. I filed an injunction yesterday. I paid the arrears on the taxes to secure your position. The bank is willing to transfer the mortgage to you to avoid a messy probate fight. So, I whispered, the realization dawning on me with the weight of a sledgehammer. They don't own the house anymore, I do. Technically, you've owned the controlling interest for 6 months, Arthur corrected. They just don't know it yet because they've been ignoring the legal notices. They think the bank is kicking them out. They don't realize the bank is just the middleman for the new owner. Me. You. It was the ultimate trap. My grandmother, in her infinite wisdom, had predicted that Susan would eventually bleed them dry. She had set up a legal failsafe to ensure that the family home would end up with the only person capable of keeping it, me. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. I wasn't just preparing a legal defense, I was preparing a fortress. I went to the grocery store and bought enough food only for one. I checked the locks on my windows. I instructed my security company to flag any unauthorized vehicles. I felt a strange mix of power and nausea. I held the deed to the roof over their heads, the very roof they had neglected while funneling cash into Susan's bottomless pit of wants. I had the power to save them or the power to ruin them. But then I remembered the hospital room. I remembered the $50,000. I remembered Mabel telling me I was strong enough to be homeless while Susan got a condo. I closed the file on my computer. I wasn't going to save them. I was going to teach them the lesson they should have learned 30 years ago. They arrived at 7:15 p.m., just as the rain transitioned from a drizzle to a torrential downpour. I was in the kitchen making tea when the headlights swept across my front window. My stomach dropped, a primal reaction to the approaching chaos. I walked to the front hallway, not rushing, my steps echoing on the hardwood floors I had paid for with my own sweat and tears. The doorbell rang, once, then again insistent and frantic. Then came the pounding. Hannah, open up, it's pouring out here. It was Oscar's voice, but it sounded thinner than I remembered, cracked with panic. I didn't open the door. Instead, I flipped the switch for the porch light, illuminating the scene outside like a stage play, and walked to the narrow window beside the door. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. It was a pathetic sight. Oscar was standing there in a windbreaker that was soaked through, his gray hair plastered to his skull. Mabel was behind him, shivering under a newspaper she was holding over her head, clutching a large, expensive-looking leather handbag that was probably worth 3 mortgage payments. And behind them, sitting in the idling car with the heater running, was Susan. I could see her silhouette in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone. She couldn't even be bothered to get out and ask for help herself. I unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the heavy security chain fastened. I opened the door 2 inches. The smell of rain and ozone rushed in, mixing with the scent of their desperation. Hannah, Mabel cried out, surging forward. Oh, thank God. Let us in, honey. It's freezing. We're soaked to the bone. WH. Why are you here? I asked. My voice was calm, almost conversational. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stood there, warm and dry, blocking the entrance to my sanctuary. What kind of question is that? Oscar sputtered, wiping water from his eyes. We're your parents, we have some news, we sold the house. You sold the house, I repeated, my eyebrows raising. In this market, over a weekend. Yes, it was a quick sale, Mabel lied, her eyes darting around, unable to meet mine. A cash offer, too good to pass up. We have to be out by tomorrow and the new condo isn't ready yet. We just need to crash here for a few weeks. Maybe a month, just until the paperwork clears. Open the door, Hannah, Oscar commanded, trying to summon his old patriarchal authority. I'm not going to discuss family business on a porch in a hurricane. You didn't sell the house, I said. The air on the porch seemed to freeze, despite the wind. Oscar stopped wiping his face. Mabel went still. Excuse me, Mabel whispered. I said you didn't sell the house, I continued, pushing the door slightly against the chain to show it was holding firm. I know about the foreclosure, Dad. I know about the reverse mortgage. I know about the 3 liens. How do you? Oscar stammered, his face flushing a deep, angry red. You've been spying on us. You hired someone. I didn't have to spy, I said. Public records are public, and I have a very good lawyer. So you know we're in trouble, Mabel cried, her strategy shifting instantly from deception to victimization. You know we're losing everything, and you're leaving us out here in the rain? Hannah, we have nowhere to go. The sheriff is coming to lock the doors at noon tomorrow. I know, I said, and I know why. Because the economy is terrible, Oscar shouted. Because of inflation. Because of Susan, I corrected. Because you cashed out your pension to pay her legal fees for that DUI 3 years ago. Because you took a second mortgage to pay off her business investment in that pyramid scheme. Because you haven't paid property taxes in 2 years because you were paying for her apartment rent. She's your sister, Mabel shrieked, the rain dripping off her nose. She needed help. She was trying to build something. She built your coffin, I said coldly, and now you want to drag me into it. We just need a room, Oscar pleaded, his anger breaking into a sob. Just a room, Hannah, for us and Susan, just until we get back on our feet. Susan is with you, I asked, looking past them to the car. Of course she is, where else would she go? Mabel demanded. She's fragile, Hannah. She's terrified. She's in the car crying right now. I looked at the car. Susan wasn't crying. The glow of her phone's screen illuminated a bored expression. She was probably checking Instagram. No, I said. No, Oscar blinked, as if I had spoken a foreign language. No, you aren't moving in. None of you. I am your mother, Mabel screamed, grabbing the door frame. I gave you life. You owe us this. We raised you. You raised me to be an ATM, I said, and this ATM is out of order. The rejection didn't send them away. It ignited them. Oscar grabbed the door handle, trying to force it open against the chain. The wood groaned, but the steel held. Open this door right now. Young lady, you do not treat your father this way. This is my house as much as yours. We are family. It's not your house, I said, stepping back slightly but keeping my hand on the door. And it's interesting you bring up ownership. At that moment, the car door slammed. Susan was finally making her entrance. She didn't run through the rain. She marched, as if the water didn't dare touch her designer coat. She stomped up the porch steps, pushing past Mabel. What is taking so long? Susan demanded. She looked at me through the crack in the door, her face contorted in a sneer. Hannah, stop playing games. I need to charge my phone and I have to pee. Let us in. Hi, Susan, I said. Long time. Yeah, whatever, she rolled her eyes. Look, Mom and Dad are too nice to say it, but we know you have plenty of room. We looked up your house on Zillow. 4 bedrooms? For one person? It's selfish, Hannah. Just let us in, and we can figure out the sleeping arrangements. I'll take the master suite since I have the most luggage. I almost laughed. The audacity was so pure, so unadulterated, it was almost impressive. You aren't coming in, Susan, I said, and frankly, neither are they. You can't do that, Susan snapped. Mom, tell her she can't do that. Hannah, Mabel pleaded, grabbing Susan's arm as if to present her as a holy relic. Look at her. She's shaking. She's had such a hard year. That life coach she hired, he swindled her. It wasn't her fault. She's a victim. Marcus Vane didn't swindle her, I said, dropping the first bomb. Susan froze. How do you know his name? I know Lot of things, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. I know that Marcus Vane isn't a life coach. He's a boyfriend you met on Tinder. And I know he didn't steal your money. You gave it to him. You transferred $40,000 of Mom and Dad's home equity line to his account to invest in crypto. But he didn't invest it, did he? He bought a Porsche. And you knew. That's a lie, Susan screamed, her face turning purple. He's a visionary. And I know about the credit cards, I continued, looking directly at Oscar. Dad, did you know that the identity theft issue you had last year wasn't a hacker? It was Susan. She opened 3 cards in your name. Oscar looked at Susan, his mouth open. Susan, you said that was the bank's error. She's lying, Susan shrieked, stamping her foot. Hannah is just jealous. She's always been jealous of me because I take risks and she's a boring little robot. I have the statements, Susan, I said calmly. I have the IP addresses used to apply for them. They match the Wi-Fi at your old condo. It doesn't matter, Mabel interjected, stepping between Oscar and Susan, shielding the predator from the prey. It doesn't matter, so she made mistakes. We forgive her. That's what family does. We forgive. Now open this door, Hannah, or I swear to God I will call the police and tell them you're holding our property. You want to involve the authorities? I asked. Okay. Don't test me, Mabel hissed. We have rights. Grandparents' rights or squatters' rights. We've been standing here for 10 minutes. That counts as residency. They were flailing. They were drowning on dry land, grasping at straws that didn't exist. You don't have rights to my home, I said. And as of this morning, you don't have rights to your old home either. We know that, Oscar shouted. The bank took it. No, I said, my voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. The bank didn't take it. The bank was going to, but someone paid off the tax lien this morning. Someone bought the debt. Susan narrowed her eyes. Who bought it? I looked at them, my mother, my father, my sister. the trinity of my trauma. I did. Silence, absolute, stunned silence. The only sound was the rain hammering against the porch roof. You, Oscar whispered. I exercised the reversionary interest clause in Nana's original deed, I said. When you defaulted, the title didn't go to the bank. It came to me. I own the house you just got kicked out of. I own the mortgage you stopped paying. I own the roof you let leak for 5 years. So, Mabel's face lit up with a grotesque, terrifying hope. So it's okay, Hannah bought it, she saved us. Oh, thank God, see, Oscar, I told you, she's a good girl, she saved the house for us. She reached for the door again, smiling now. Oh, Hannah, thank you, that's such a relief. We can just move back in then, or stay here while you fix it up for us. I looked at her smile, that entitlement, that complete inability to understand consequences. She thought I had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to be their safety net again. She thought I was the same girl in the hospital bed, handing over her life to keep Susan warm. You don't understand, I said. I didn't buy it to save you. I held up my phone. I'm making a single phone call right now. To who? Susan asked, her voice trembling for the first time. To the movers. No, I said, dialing the number I had saved as priority 1. To Mr. Henderson. I put the phone on speaker. It rang once. Henderson, the voice answered. Arthur, it's Hannah. They're here. Are they inside? No, they are on the porch. Good, Arthur said. Do you want to proceed with the filing? I looked at my parents. I looked at the fear in their eyes. Yes, I said. Execute the eviction. Change the locks on the old property immediately. And Arthur, tell the sheriff he can serve the trespassing notice for this address now. They're refusing to leave. Done, Arthur said. Deputies are 5 minutes out. I hung up. You're evicting us, Oscar choked out, from our own home. It's not your home, I said, finally closing the door and sliding the deadbolt home with a final, decisive thud. It's my rental property, and I don't rent to people with bad credit. I turned off the porch light, plunging them into darkness. The darkness on the porch didn't last long. Within 4 minutes, the quiet residential street was bathed in the chaotic, strobing wash of blue and red lights. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up to the curb, their sirens chirping briefly to announce their arrival. I watched from the living room window, hidden behind the curtains. The moment the cruisers arrived, Mabel's demeanor shifted from desperate to theatrical. She threw herself down on the top step of the porch, sobbing loudly, while Susan crossed her arms and leaned against the railing, looking like a bored teenager waiting for a R. Eyed at them all. Oscar just stood there, staring at the closed door, looking like a man whose entire world had just dissolved into mist. I opened the front door and stepped out just as the officers were walking up the driveway. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the humidity was suffocating. What seems to be the problem here? The lead officer asked. He was a tall man with a stern face, his hand resting casually near his belt. She's abusing us, Mabel shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. My daughter, she's thrown us out, we are elderly, we have medical conditions. She locked us out in the storm. The neighbors were coming out now. I saw Mrs. Higgins from next door standing on her porch in her bathrobe. Mr. Henderson, not my lawyer, but the grumpy retiree across the street, was watching from his driveway. This was the public humiliation they had feared, but they were the ones creating the spectacle. Officer, I said calmly, stepping into the pool of light. I am the homeowner. These people do not live here. They have never lived here. I have asked them to leave multiple times and they are refusing. They are trespassing. She's lying, Susan shouted, stepping forward. We're family, you can't trespass family. Actually, you can, the officer said, looking at Susan with zero patience. He turned to me. Ma'am, can you prove ownership? I can, I said. I handed him the file folder I had prepared. It contained the deed to my current house, my driver's license, and the digital copy of the foreclosure transfer for their old house, proving they had no residence there either. The officer flipped through the papers under the beam of his flashlight. "This looks in order." "Ma'am," he said to Mabel, "you need to vacate the premises. The homeowner has the right to ask you to leave." "But we have nowhere to go," Mabel wailed, clutching Oscar's arm. "She stole our house. She manipulated the bank." "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I wanted the neighbors to hear. I wanted the world to hear. I saved the property from being auctioned off to strangers because you stopped paying the bills." "Because of you," Oscar suddenly shouted, finding his voice. He turned to me, his face twisted in anguish. "If you had just helped us, if you had just given us a loan." "A loan?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Like the $50,000 you stole from me 10 years ago, or the loan you took against your house to give to Susan." I walked down the steps, ignoring the officers for a moment, and stopped right in front of my father. I held out the second document from my folder, the one concerning the credit cards. "You want to talk about loans, Dad?" I said, thrusting the paper at him. "Look at this, look at it." "Get that away from me," he muttered, backing away. "Look at it," I commanded. "You said the bank made a mistake with those credit cards in your name. You said it was identity theft. It was." I shined my phone's flashlight onto the paper in his hands. "That is the tracking report from the credit card company's fraud department," I said. "They traced the applications. They didn't come from Russia. They didn't come from a hacker. They came from a specific IP address." Oscar looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. That's the address of Susan's condo," he whispered. "Yes," I said, "and the email used, sparklesue85@gmail. Is that a Russian hacker, Dad, or is it the woman standing right behind you?" Oscar froze. The rain dripped from his nose onto the paper, blurring the ink, but the truth was indelible. He slowly turned around to face Susan. Susan didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed. "Oh, come on, Dad. It was an emergency. I needed to maintain my credit score for the business. I was going to pay it back once the jewelry line took off." You opened 3 cards," Oscar stammered, his voice trembling with a rage I had never seen directed at her. $30,000. In my name, you let me believe I was being targeted by criminals." "You were," I said softly, "just not the kind you thought." "It was for the family," Mabel interjected, frantically trying to step between them. "Oscar, don't look at her like that. She did what she had to do. She's your daughter." "So am I," I shouted, finally letting the dam break. "I am your daughter too, but you never stole from me. You only stole from me." Oscar looked at Mabel. Then he looked at Susan, who was rolling her eyes and checking her nails. For the first time in 30 years, the fog cleared. He saw the selfishness. He saw the disdain. He saw the monster he had fed with his own flesh and blood. "You stole my identity," Oscar said to Susan, his voice quiet and dangerous. "I borrowed your credit," Susan snapped. "God, you're being so dramatic, just like Hannah." Oscar turned to the police officer. "Officer," he said, his posture straightening, "I would lick to file a report." "Oscar," Mabel screamed. "No, she's your baby." "No," Oscar said, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "She's a thief, and I'm done paying for it." He pointed at Susan. "I want to press charges for identity theft and credit card fraud. I have the evidence right here." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan's jaw dropped. The arrogance vanished, replaced by genuine, terrified shock. "Dad," she whimpered. "Don't call me that," he said. "You don't respect me, you just use me." The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us so we can sort this out at the station." As the officers guided a screaming Mabel and a stunned Susan toward the cruisers, Oscar stood alone on my driveway. He looked at me. He looked old, broken, and incredibly small. "Go with them, Dad," I said gently. "You have to finish this." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask to come in again. He didn't ask for money. He just turned and walked toward the police car, stepping out of my life and into the reality he had avoided for decades. It took 6 months for the dust to settle. In that time, the legal machinery ground Susan's entitlement into dust. With Oscar's testimony and the digital trail I had helped uncover, she was charged with multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. Because it was a first offense, she avoided significant jail time, but she was sentenced to 5 years of probation, community service, and mandated restitution. The real punishment, however, was the reality check. With no parents to bail her out, no condo, and a criminal record that flagged on every background check, Susan was forced to take a job as a night shift stalker at a big box retailer. She lived in a rented room in a boarding house. I heard through the grapevine that she was miserable, but for the first time in her life, she was paying her own way. Mabel didn't handle it well. She moved into a small, state-subsidized senior apartment. She spent her days calling relatives, complaining about how Oscar had betrayed the family and how I was a cold-hearted snake. I didn't mind. A snake is safe as long as you don't step on it, and I made sure she never got close enough to step on me again. I blocked her number the day after the confrontation. Oscar was a different story. He had moved into a separate efficiency apartment, a few blocks from Mabel but legally separated. The realization of what Susan had done, and his role in enabling it, had broken something in him, but it also woke him up. I was standing in the living room of their old house, my house now, when he came to visit. The house was empty. I had hired a crew to clear out the decades of hoarding and neglect. The carpets were ripped up, exposing the hardwood. The walls were stripped of the yellowed wallpaper. It smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, the scent of a new beginning. I was flipping it. I had no desire to live in the museum of my childhood trauma, but I was going to make a healthy profit on its sale. The front door opened, and Oscar walked in. He looked better than he had that night in the rain. He was clean-shaven, wearing a simple flannel shirt. "It looks bigger," he said, looking around the empty living room. "It's amazing what happens when you clear out the junk," I said, sanding a rough patch on the banister. He walked over to the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel. "Your grandmother loved this house. She always said it had good bones." "She was right," I said. "It just needed a strong owner." Oscar turned to me. He didn't have the defensive posture he used to carry. He just looked tired and sad. "I'm sorry, Hannah," he said. It wasn't a long speech. It wasn't flowery. But it was the first time in my life I had heard him say those words without a but attached to them. "I know," I said. I thought we were doing the right thing," he said, his voice cracking. "We thought Susan needed us. We thought you were okay because you were so solid. We punished you for being capable." "Yes," I said, "you did." "I can't pay you back," he said, looking down at his shoes. "The 50,000, it's gone, I have nothing." "I know," I said. "I don't want the money, Dad. I made my own money." I gestured to the house around us. "This house is going to sell for 300,000 more than the debt on it. That's my inheritance now. I took it back." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You always were the smart one. You beat us at our own game." "I wasn't playing a game," I said seriously. "I was surviving." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key. "I found this in my old tackle box. It's the key to your grandmother's old cedar chest. The one I sold years ago. I kept the key. I don't know why. I think she would have wanted you to have it, even if there's no chest to open." I took the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm. "Thank you," I said. "I am going to go now," he said. "I just wanted to see the place one last time, and to tell you, I'm proud of you. I know I never said it, but I am." "Thanks, Dad," I said. I didn't invite him to dinner. I didn't offer to pay his rent. I didn't hug him. Too much had happened, and some bridges, once burned, can only be admired from a distance. But as he walked out the door, into the sunlight, I felt the heavy weight I had been carrying since that day in the hospital finally lift. I sold the house 2 months later to a young couple expecting their first child. I used the profit to pay off my own mortgage and start a college fund for the children I hope to have one day. I never let my parents move in. I never gave them another dime. But I gave them the most valuable thing I could, the consequences of their own actions. And in doing so, I finally gave myself permission to be free.